Welcome to Ironwood Whispers, your corner for stories that hit the heart and spark the imagination. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? Share your city or country down in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you're ready for a journey filled with twists, turns, and emotions that'll keep you hooked till the very end, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Once upon a time, a stunning woman was cruelly humiliated at a wedding by her wealthy ex. Just when her world seemed to crumble, a charming CEO leaned in and whispered, "Be my date." Moments later, he unveiled a jaw-dropping secret about the bride that left everyone speechless. The garden wedding at the Breakers estate in Newport was supposed to be the social event of the season. Elizabeth Chen adjusted her silk lavender dress for the third time, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her through the crowd of perfectly coiffed guests. At 28, she had thought she was past caring about the opinions of her former social circle, but being back among them, especially at her ex-boyfriend Richard's wedding, was proving more difficult than anticipated. She'd only come because the bride, Jessica, had been her college roommate, though their friendship had cooled considerably after Elizabeth discovered Jessica had been secretly dating Richard while they were still together. Well, if it isn't Elizabeth Chen, a familiar sneering voice cut through the cocktail hour chatter. Richard Hawthorne III stood before her, resplendent in his custom tuxedo, his new bride nowhere in sight. "I'm surprised you had the courage to show your face here. Still working at that little non-profit." How quaint! The champagne glass in Elizabeth's hand trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Congratulations on your wedding, Richard. I hope you and Jessica will be very happy together." His laugh was cruel and carried across the terrace. "Happy? Oh, Elizabeth, you always were naive. This is a merger, not a marriage. The Hawthorns and the Sterlings. Now that's a power couple. Unlike when I was slumming it with you." The words hit their mark, and Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn as nearby guests pretended not to hear, while obviously listening to every word. Richard had always known exactly how to hurt her, how to make her feel small despite her Harvard MBA and successful career at a children's charity. "Tell me," Richard continued, his voice dripping with false concern, "how does it feel to see your former best friend wearing the ring that should have been yours? Though let's be honest, you never really belonged in this world. Jessica understands things like prenups and social capital. You wanted to talk about feelings and changing the world." He laughed again, and several of his groomsmen joined in. Elizabeth was searching for a dignified exit when a deep voice spoke from behind her. "Miss Chen, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." She turned to find a tall man, with striking grey eyes and prematurely silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. He was perhaps 35, wearing a tuxedo that made Richards look cheap by comparison. She didn't recognize him, but something in his bearing commanded attention. "I'm sorry," she said, confused. The stranger smoothly took her elbow, his touch gentle but firm. "You promised me a tour of the gardens before the ceremony. I'm particularly interested in the heritage roses." He turned to Richard with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll excuse us, won't you?" Richard's face had gone pale. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize you knew Elizabeth." The name Sterling rang a bell. Pharmaceutical dynasty, billions in cancer drug patents, notoriously private. Edward Sterling, CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, The man who'd revolutionized affordable cancer treatment while somehow becoming one of the wealthiest men in America. "Oh, Elizabeth and I go way back," Edward said smoothly, though they'd never met before this moment. "In fact, I was just about to ask her to be my date for the reception." "You don't mind, do you? After all, you have your bride to attend to." He leaned closer to Elizabeth, his breath warm against her ear. "Play along," he whispered. "Trust me?" Something in his voice made her nod. "Of course, Edward. I'd be delighted." She placed her hand on his offered arm, noting how Richard's jaw clenched at her use of the billionaire's first name. As they walked away, leaving Richard speechless behind them, Edward guided her toward a quiet corner of the garden. "Thank you," Elizabeth said once they were out of earshot. "Though I'm not sure why you—" "Because Richard Hawthorne is a pompous ass who deserves to be taken down a peg," Edward interrupted. "And because I have something rather important to tell you about your friend Jessica. Something I think you deserve to know before this wedding goes any further." Edward led her to a secluded gazebo overlooking the ocean, ensuring they were completely alone before he spoke again. "First, I should properly introduce myself. Edward Sterling. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. But when I saw Richard cornering you, I couldn't stand by—" Elizabeth studied him more carefully now. The intelligent eyes, the slight lines around his mouth that suggested he smiled often, the way he carried himself with confidence but not arrogance. "I know who you are, Mr. Sterling. Your company's affordable insulin program saved my grandmother's life. But that doesn't explain why you're at Richard's wedding, or why you intervened. I'm here because the Hawthorne family is trying to acquire one of my subsidiaries. They think this wedding will give them the social leverage they need." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "As for why I intervened, let's just say I have a particular distaste for bullies. But that's not the important part. Elizabeth, what do you know about Jessica's pregnancy?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Pregnancy? Jessica's not. They just got engaged 3 months ago. Edward's expression was grim. She's 4 months pregnant. But here's the thing. Richard had a vasectomy 2 years ago. He's been keeping it secret, planning to reverse it after the wedding. He doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. Elizabeth sank onto the gazebo bench, her mind reeling. How could you possibly know this? Edward sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. Richard's father bragged about it at a business dinner, said his son was being smart about protecting assets before marriage. As for Jessica's pregnancy, my sister is her gynecologist. She didn't tell me directly, of course, but when Jessica came to her panicking about how to hide a pregnancy from her fiancé, my sister was concerned enough to mention it obliquely. Professional ethics prevent her from saying more, but Jessica's baby isn't Richard's, Elizabeth finished, the pieces falling into place. Jessica's sudden weight gain, her avoiding alcohol even at her bachelorette party, her nervous behavior lately. Oh my God. She's trying to trick him into thinking it's his after they're married. Edward nodded gravely. It appears so. The question is, what do we do with this information? Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. Why tell me? Why do you care what happens to any of them? Because I've been watching you all evening, Edward admitted. The way you held your head high despite the whispers. The dignity with which you handled Richard's cruelty. You could have made a scene. Could have mentioned how Jessica betrayed your friendship by sleeping with your boyfriend, but you didn't. That kind of grace under pressure is rare. He stood, offering her his hand. So I have a proposition. Be my actual date for this reception. Help me navigate the social minefield of this crowd. I'm notoriously bad at small talk. In return, I'll make sure Richard knows exactly what kind of woman he's marrying. Call it poetic justice." Elizabeth looked at his extended hand, then at the elegant reception tent being prepared in the distance. She could leave now, maintain her dignity, and never look back. Or she could take this stranger's hand and watch her ex-boyfriend's world implode. "You know what?" she said, standing and smoothing her dress. "I think I'd very much like to be your date, Mr. Sterling." His smile transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "Please, call me Edward. And for what it's worth, Richard Hawthorne is an idiot. Any man who would choose Jessica Sterling over you clearly has no taste." As they walked back toward the reception, Edward told her more about himself. He'd built Sterling Pharmaceuticals from the ground up after watching his mother die of cancer when he was 25. "She couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved her life," he said quietly. "I swore then that I'd find a way to make life-saving medications accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. It took me 10 years, but we did it. The profits followed, though that was never the primary goal." Elizabeth found herself genuinely interested, asking about his research, his business philosophy, his plans for expansion into rare disease treatments. "You know," Edward said, as they approached the reception tent, "most people's eyes glaze over when I talk about pharmaceutical development." Elizabeth smiled. "Well, I'm not most people. My non-profit works with chronically ill children. I see firsthand how your affordable medications change lives. Your company's leukemia treatment gave one of our kids, Tommy, a chance at a normal childhood. So no, my eyes won't be glazing over." Edward stopped walking, looking at her with something like wonder. "You run the Rainbow Foundation. I should have recognized your name. We've been trying to partner with you for months." The reception was in full swing when they entered, and their arrival caused an immediate stir. Edward Sterling rarely attended social events, and never with a date. The fact that he was with Elizabeth Chen, Richard's ex-girlfriend, set tongues wagging immediately. They found their seats. Edward had somehow arranged for them to be at the same table as the wedding party, and settled in for what promised to be an interesting evening. Richard's face was a study in conflicting emotions when he saw them together. He kept shooting glances their way during the toasts, clearly trying to figure out how Elizabeth knew Edward Sterling. Jessica, meanwhile, looked increasingly uncomfortable, her hand frequently going to her stomach in what Elizabeth now recognized as a protective gesture. The bride's maid of honor was halfway through a rambling speech about true love when Edward leaned over to whisper in Elizabeth's ear. "I have to admit, this is more entertaining than I expected. Richard looks like he swallowed a lemon." Elizabeth suppressed a laugh. "You're enjoying this too much, perhaps," Edward agreed. "But after what he said to you earlier, I think a little discomfort is warranted. Besides, I have a feeling the real entertainment is yet to come." He was right. As the evening progressed and the alcohol flowed freely, tensions began to surface. Richard, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, approached their table. "Sterling," he said, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "I didn't realize you knew my ex-girlfriend." Edward smiled pleasantly. "Oh, Elizabeth and I have been circling each other for a while now. The non-profit world and pharmaceutical industry often intersect. Though I must say, Richard, ex-girlfriend seems like an inadequate description for a woman of Elizabeth's caliber. I prefer to think of her as the one who got away." "From you, that is." Richard's face flushed. Yes, well, we all make mistakes in our youth, indeed, Edward agreed, though some mistakes are bigger than others. Marriage, for instance, should never be a mistake. Wouldn't you agree? The emphasis he placed on certain words made Richard shift uncomfortably. Of course. Jessica and I are perfect for each other. Edward's smile widened. Perfect. Such an interesting word, though I suppose perfection, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, or perhaps in the blood test results. Richard went very still. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, I think you do, Edward said quietly. Or you will soon. Congratulations on the wedding, by the way, and on the upcoming additions to your family. Before Richard could respond, the band leader announced the father-daughter dance. Richard was forced to return to his bride, but the look he shot over his shoulder was murderous. Elizabeth turned to Edward. That was cryptic. Just planting seeds, Edward replied. The beauty of the truth is that it has a way of revealing itself. We just have to be patient. As if on cue, Jessica's father took the microphone after their dance, tears in his eyes. I'm so happy for my little girl, he began, clearly emotional and slightly drunk. And I have some wonderful news to share. Jessica just told me. I'm going to be a grandfather. The reception tent erupted in surprised congratulations, but Elizabeth was watching Richard. His face went from confused to shocked to furious in the space of seconds. He grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her aside for what appeared to be an intense whispered conversation. Jessica was shaking her head frantically, her face pale beneath her makeup. The band tried to start playing again, but the tension was palpable. I think that's our cue, Edward murmured, standing and offering Elizabeth his hand. Would you care to dance? We should give the happy couple some space to discuss things. As they moved onto the dance floor, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for Jessica, despite everything. This is cruel, she said softly. Edward pulled her closer, his hand warm on her back. Is it? She was prepared to lie to him for the rest of their marriage, to make him believe another man's child was his. Which is crueler? They danced in silence for a moment, and Elizabeth was surprised to find how well they moved together. Edward was an excellent dancer, leading her with a confidence that made her feel graceful despite her lack of recent practice. Around them, other couples were whispering and shooting glances at the wedding party's table, where Richard and Jessica were now in heated discussion with both sets of parents. You know, Elizabeth said, a year ago, I would have given anything to see Richard humiliated like this. But now, it just feels sad. All of it. Edward spun her gently, then pulled her back. That's because you have something Richard and Jessica don't. Integrity. You could have revealed Jessica's betrayal at any point. Could have made their relationship difficult from the start. But you chose to walk away with dignity. The song ended, but Edward didn't let her go immediately. Would you like to get some air? I have a feeling things are about to get even more uncomfortable in here. They walked out onto the terrace just as raised voices became audible from inside. Through the glass doors, they could see Richard gesticulating wildly while Jessica sobbed. Her father was red-faced, Richard's mother looked ready to faint, and the wedding guests were trying desperately to pretend they weren't watching the drama unfold. Come on, Edward said, leading her down toward the beach. Let's take a walk. I think they need privacy for what comes next. The beach was beautiful in the moonlight, and Elizabeth kicked off her heels to walk in the sand. Edward rolled up his pant legs, and they strolled along the water's edge in comfortable silence. Can I ask you something? Elizabeth said eventually. Why did you really intervene tonight? The truth this time. Edward was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I saw myself in you. The outsider trying to belong, maintaining dignity while others tried to tear you down. And because Richard Hawthorne represents everything I despise about inherited wealth. The entitlement, the cruelty, the assumption that money makes you better than others. But you're wealthy, Elizabeth pointed out. Edward laughed. Now I am. But I grew up in South Boston, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I know what it's like to be looked down on, to be told you don't belong. When I saw Richard doing that to you, he shrugged. I couldn't stand by and watch. They found a piece of driftwood and sat down, watching the waves. Elizabeth found herself telling Edward about her relationship with Richard, how he'd slowly chipped away at her self-esteem, made her feel like she had to choose between her non-profit work and being worthy of his world. The worst part was losing Jessica as a friend, she admitted. We'd been so close in college, but money changed her, or maybe revealed who she really was. When she started seeing Richard behind my back, it hurt worse than the breakup itself. Edward listened without interrupting, and Elizabeth realized how long it had been since someone had really listened to her. What about you? She asked. No wedding ring, but there must be someone. Billionaire philanthropists don't usually attend weddings alone. No one special, Edward said. I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. She loved the idea of me more than the reality. Wanted the fortune, but not the 14-hour days in the lab. When she realized I'd always prioritize finding cures over attending charity galas, she found someone more suitable. Last I heard, she'd married a hedge fund manager who golfs every weekend. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. Since then, I've focused on the work. It's easier than trying to figure out if someone wants me or my bank account. They talked until the moon was high overhead, about everything and nothing. Elizabeth told him about her kids at the foundation, the success stories that kept her going. Edward shared his vision for making healthcare truly universal, his frustration with pharmaceutical companies that prioritized profits over patients. She found him brilliant, but humble, driven but compassionate. Nothing like the cold, calculating businessman she'd expected. We should probably head back, Edward said eventually, checking his phone. I have 17 missed calls. I'm guessing the wedding imploded rather spectacularly. They walked back slowly, neither eager to return to the chaos. As they approached the estate, they could see police cars in the parking lot. That can't be good, Elizabeth muttered. Edward frowned. Stay here. Let me find out what's happening. He returned a few minutes later, his expression a mix of amusement and concern. Apparently, Richard confronted Jessica's actual baby father, one of his groomsmen, it turns out. There was a fistfight. The police were called. The wedding is very definitively over. Elizabeth felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. Which groomsman? Bradley Ashford. Brad. But he's Richard's best friend from prep school. Not anymore, I'm guessing, Edward said dryly. They retrieved Elizabeth's car from the valet, and Edward insisted on driving her home. It's been quite an evening, he said as they pulled up to her brownstone in Brooklyn. Thank you for being my date. You made an insufferable event, not just bearable, but actually enjoyable. Elizabeth smiled. Thank you for rescuing me from Richard's vitriol, and for the dance, and the conversation, and for revealing the truth, even if the aftermath was messy. Speaking of which, Edward said, pulling out his phone. I meant what I said earlier about Sterling Pharmaceuticals wanting to partner with the Rainbow Foundation. Would you be willing to meet for lunch this week? Strictly professional, of course. though I reserve the right to try to convince you to be my +1 for the Pharmaceutical Innovation Awards next month." Elizabeth pretended to consider it. "Will there be any wedding drama? God, I hope not. Then it's a date. I mean, a business meeting." With a potential date attached, Edward grinned, and she was struck again by how it transformed his usually serious face. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant call yours. And Elizabeth, for what it's worth, Richard Hawthorne is going to spend the rest of his life regretting losing you. As he should." He waited until she was safely inside before driving away, and Elizabeth found herself watching from her window until his taillights disappeared. Her phone was already buzzing with texts from people who'd been at the wedding, wanting details about her mystery billionaire date. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to find the wedding drama splashed across social media. Someone had filmed the confrontation between Richard and Brad, and it had already gone viral. "Billionaire pharmaceutical CEO exposes wedding night paternity scandal," read one headline, though Edward's name was thankfully kept out of most reports. Her phone rang. Jessica calling. Elizabeth almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "How could you?" Jessica's voice was hoarse from crying. "You brought Edward Sterling to humiliate us. You've always been jealous of what Richard and I had." Elizabeth laughed, actually laughed. "Jessica, you slept with my boyfriend while pretending to be my friend. You got pregnant by his best friend and tried to pass the baby off as Richard's. And you think I'm the villain here?" "You don't understand," Jessica sobbed. "Brad meant nothing. It was just one night. I love Richard." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "You love Richard's money and status, just like he loved what he thought was your pedigree and connections. You two deserved each other, and you both got exactly what you deserved." She hung up and blocked Jessica's number, feeling lighter than she had in years. Her assistant, Maria, arrived at the office with coffee and a knowing smile. "So, Edward Sterling, the Edward Sterling, girl, you've been holding out on me." Elizabeth blushed. "It's not like that. He just helped me out of an awkward situation." "Uh-huh. And now he wants a business meeting. The man who never takes meetings wants to meet with us." "It's about the partnership we've been trying to establish," Elizabeth protested. Maria wasn't buying it. "Elizabeth, I've been your assistant for 3 years. You had a glow when you came in this morning that has nothing to do with business partnerships. That man is interested in more than our pharmaceutical distribution program." Before Elizabeth could respond, an enormous bouquet of coral roses arrived. The card read, "To new beginnings and unexpected partnerships. Looking forward to lunch." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Just business, huh?" The lunch meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn that Elizabeth had mentioned loving during their beach walk. Edward arrived precisely on time, looking less formal in a tailored but simple grey suit. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the casual setting. "I thought somewhere quiet would be better for discussion than some stuffy Manhattan power lunch spot." Elizabeth smiled. "It's perfect. Though I notice you said Manhattan, not Brooklyn." "Old habits," he admitted. "I'm trying to be better about my geographic biases." They did discuss business. Edward's vision for partnering with grassroots organizations. Elizabeth's innovative distribution ideas for getting medications to underserved communities. But the conversation kept veering into personal territory. Edward was fascinated by her journey from Harvard MBA to non-profit work. "Most of your classmates went to Wall Street or consulting. What made you choose differently?" My younger brother, Elizabeth explained. He has type 1 diabetes. Watching my parents struggle to afford his insulin, even with insurance, opened my eyes to how broken our healthcare system is. I realized I could make more of a difference working to fix it than I could making money on Wall Street. Edward leaned forward, his eyes intense. That's exactly why I want this partnership. You understand the human side of what we do. Too many pharmaceutical executives see patients as numbers on a spreadsheet. They worked through 2 courses, barely noticing the food as they mapped out a pilot program. Edward's passion for the project was infectious, and Elizabeth found herself getting excited about the possibilities. If this works, she said, we could revolutionize how medications reach vulnerable populations. When this works, Edward corrected with a smile. I have faith in us. We make a good team. The way he said us sent an unexpected flutter through Elizabeth's stomach. She tried to refocus on the business at hand, but it was hard to ignore the way his eyes lit up when he talked about helping people, or how he genuinely listened to her ideas instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. As they were finishing coffee, Edward's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. I'm sorry. There's a situation at our Boston facility I need to handle. But I meant what I said about the awards gala. Will you come? Fair warning. It's even stuffier than the wedding, but I promise no paternity scandals. Elizabeth laughed. How can I refuse such an enticing offer? Excellent. I'll send details. And Elizabeth? This was the best business meeting I've had in years. The way he looked at her suggested it had very little to do with business. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth and Edward fell into a rhythm of meetings, both professional and increasingly personal. They toured facilities together, strategized over dinners that lasted hours, texted constantly about everything from pharmaceutical regulations to their favorite books. Maria took to giving Elizabeth knowing looks every time Edward's name appeared on her phone. That man is courting you, Maria insisted. Old-fashioned style. When's the last time a guy courted you, instead of just asking to hang out? Elizabeth had to admit Maria had a point. Edward was attentive without being pushy, romantic without overstepping professional boundaries. He sent thoughtful gifts. A first edition of a book she'd mentioned, Loving Rare Tea, from a small company he'd discovered, always with notes that referenced their conversations. He asked about her kids at the foundation by name, remembered her coffee order, and somehow always knew when she needed encouragement after a tough day. The night of the Pharmaceutical Innovation Awards, Edward picked her up in a Tesla. Elizabeth wore a midnight blue gown she'd splurged on, and the look on Edward's face when he saw her made every penny worth it. You look incredible, he said softly. I'm going to be the envy of every man there. Just remember, Elizabeth teased, I'm only here to save you from small talk. My hero, Edward replied with a grin. The gala was indeed stuffy, but Edward made it bearable with whispered commentary about the other attendees. See that man by the bar? He's been trying to patent genes. Actual human genes. As if he invented them, Elizabeth stifled a laugh. And the woman in pink? Senator's wife. She's on 4 boards and understands none of them. Nice woman, though. Donates a fortune to animal shelters. They worked the room together, and Elizabeth was surprised by how naturally they fell into sync, one picking up when the other needed a break from conversation. During the award ceremony, Sterling Pharmaceuticals won for innovation in accessible healthcare. In his acceptance speech, Edward thanked his team, then said, "But most importantly, I want to thank the organizations working on the ground to get these medications to patients. Special recognition goes to the Rainbow Foundation and its remarkable director, Elizabeth Chen, whose partnership has shown us that good business and good ethics aren't mutually exclusive. The spotlight found her in the crowd, and Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn as hundreds of people applauded. "Did you have to do that?" she whispered when he returned to their table. Edward looked unrepentant. "Yes, you deserve recognition for your work. Besides, you look beautiful in spotlight." Before she could respond, the band started playing, and Edward stood, offering his hand. "Dance with me?" This time, dancing felt different. There was no pretense, no agenda, just the two of them moving together. "I should warn you," Edward said as he spun her. "People are starting to talk about us." "What are they saying?" "That Edward Sterling has finally found someone who interests him more than his lab. That Elizabeth Chen has somehow made the notorious workaholic take actual weekends off." "Have I?" Elizabeth asked, surprised. Edward's expression softened. "You have." "Last Saturday, I went to a farmer's market instead of the office. Bought heirloom tomatoes. Cooked actual food. It was revolutionary." Elizabeth laughed. "Next you'll tell me you read a novel, actually." He looked almost cheapish. "I downloaded that series you mentioned. I'm on book 3. Edward Sterling reading fantasy novels. The medical journals must be feeling neglected. They'll survive. I'm discovering there's more to life than impact factors and clinical trials." As the evening wound down, Edward walked her to the terrace for fresh air. The city sparkled below them, and Elizabeth shivered slightly in the cool breeze. Without hesitation, Edward removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Elizabeth," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "Yes?" she prompted. "I need to be honest with you. What started as a business partnership has become much more for me. I find myself looking for excuses to see you, staying up too late, texting you about ridiculous things, boring my board of directors with stories about your foundation." He paused, running a hand through his silver hair. "I'm probably terrible at this. It's been a long time since I've wanted to be good at it." Elizabeth's heart was racing, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "You're not terrible at it. You're actually quite good at it." "Annoyingly good, according to Maria." Edward's face lit up. "Really? Really? Though if you could stop making everyone else look bad by comparison, that would be helpful. You're ruining my already low dating standards." He laughed, pulling her closer. "I'll try to be more mediocre. Maybe show up late once in a while. Forget your coffee order. Talk only about myself." "Don't you dare," Elizabeth warned. "I've gotten used to being spoiled." They stood there for a moment, the tension between them electric. "Elizabeth," Edward said softly, "would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not a business dinner. A real date. No pharmaceutical talk. Allowed." "What would we even talk about without pharmaceuticals?" Elizabeth teased. "Literature, travel, your brother's baseball obsession, my secret love of cooking shows, whether the Knicks will ever have a decent season. I have a whole list prepared." Elizabeth pretended to consider it. "You have a list?" "I'm very thorough, I've noticed. Yes, I'll have dinner with you. On one condition, anything. You cook. I want to see these farmers' market skills in action." Edward's smile was radiant. "Deal. Fair warning. I've only mastered about 5 dishes. 5 more than me," Elizabeth admitted. "Perfect. We'll learn together." As he drove her home, they made plans for the next evening. Edward would cook at his Brooklyn brownstone, and Elizabeth would bring dessert. It felt wonderfully normal, like something regular people did, not billionaire philanthropists and non-profit directors. Thank you for tonight, Elizabeth said as they pulled up to her building. For the recognition, the dancing, the jacket, the terrible jokes about patent law. Thank you for making it bearable, Edward replied. For being yourself. For calling me out when I get too serious, for reminding me why I do this work in the first place. He walked her to her door, and for a moment Elizabeth thought he might kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, old-fashioned and charming. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. Inside her apartment, Elizabeth leaned against the door and tried to calm her racing heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Edward, already looking forward to tomorrow. "Sleep well, Elizabeth." She smiled, typing back, "You too. Don't stay up too late reading fantasy novels." His response was immediate. Too late. The dragon just appeared. How am I supposed to sleep, not knowing if they defeated? Elizabeth laughed, settling in for what she suspected would be a long night of texting about fictional dragons with a billionaire, who was rapidly becoming very real to her. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to find the gossip blogs had picked up on their appearance together at the gala. Sterling Pharma CEO's mystery woman, identified as non-profit director, read one headline. Her phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, which she ignored. Edward texted, "I'm sorry about the media attention. I can have my PR team issue a statement if you'd like." "It's fine," Elizabeth replied. "Though mystery woman is a bit dramatic. I prefer a woman of mystery, noted for future press releases," Edward responded, making her laugh. She spent the day distracted, checking the clock more often than she'd like to admit. Maria noticed, of course. "You have a date with Mr. Pharmaceutical tonight, don't you?" "It's just dinner," Elizabeth protested. "He's cooking." Maria's eyes widened. "A billionaire is cooking for you. Girl, that's not just dinner. That's a declaration. You're being dramatic." "Am I? When's the last time Richard boiled water for you?" Maria had a point. Richard had treated restaurants like his personal dining room, but wouldn't have known how to turn on a stove. That evening, Elizabeth arrived at Edward's brownstone with a box from her favorite bakery. The building was elegant but understated, fitting seamlessly into the historic neighborhood. Edward answered the door wearing jeans and a casual button-down, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Welcome," he said, taking the bakery box. "Fair warning, I may have gone slightly overboard with menu planning. The house smelled amazing. Garlic, herbs, something rich and tomatoey. What are you making?" "Pasta arrabbiata, Caesar salad, and garlic bread. Plus, antipasti that I may have panic-purchased from the Italian market." Elizabeth laughed. "You panic-purchased antipasti?" "I wanted options. What if you didn't like olives? Or preferred different cheese?" He led her to the kitchen, where indeed an impressive spread of Italian delicacies covered the counter. "Edward," Elizabeth said, touched by his nervousness, "it's perfect. All of it." He visibly relaxed. "Wine?" "I have a Barolo that the wine shop assured me pairs well with spicy pasta." As he poured, Elizabeth explored the kitchen, noting the well-used cookbooks, the professional-grade equipment, the herbs growing on the windowsill. "You weren't kidding about the cooking shows," she observed. "Food Network is my guilty pleasure," Edward admitted. "I find the precision relaxing. It's like chemistry, but edible." They settled into easy conversation as Edward finished cooking. Elizabeth perched on a bar stool, stealing bites of antipasti and watching him work. He moved with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. But there was a looseness to him here, in his own space, that she found incredibly attractive. "Tell me about your brother," Edward said as he stirred the sauce. You mentioned he plays baseball? Elizabeth smiled. Kevin. He's 22, just graduated from college. He's actually hoping to get into medical research, partly inspired by how far diabetes treatment has come. She paused. He wants to meet you, by the way. I may have mentioned you once or twice, Edward teased. Okay, maybe more. He's particularly impressed that you respond to my random medical questions at odd hours. I like your random medical questions. Last week's about drug interactions in pediatric patients led to an interesting research tangent. They continued talking through dinner, which was delicious, despite Edward's protests that the pasta was slightly overcooked. Elizabeth couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed a meal so much. Not just the food, but the company, the conversation, the way Edward's eyes crinkled when he laughed. After dinner, they moved to the living room with wine and Elizabeth's dessert, cannoli from the best bakery in Brooklyn. These are dangerous, Edward said after his first bite. I may need you to bring these every time you come over. Every time? Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. I'm being presumptuous, Edward said, but he didn't look sorry. I'm hoping this is the first of many dinners, preferably without months of business meetings as foreplay. Elizabeth nearly choked on her wine. Did you just say foreplay? Edward's face flushed slightly. That came out differently than intended. Though not inaccurately, they were sitting closer now, the space between them charged with possibility. Edward, Elizabeth said softly, what are we doing here? He set down his wine glass, turning to face her fully. I hope we're starting something. I haven't felt this way in... Honestly, I don't know if I've ever felt this way. You challenge me, make me laugh, remind me there's a world outside my lab. When I'm with you, I'm not thinking about the next acquisition or clinical trial. I'm just happy. I feel the same way, Elizabeth admitted, which terrifies me a little. Why? Because the last time I let someone in, he spent 2 years making me feel small. And his best friend is currently dealing with a paternity scandal, while my former best friend figures out single motherhood. I'm not Richard, Edward said firmly. I know. You're nothing like Richard. That's what scares me. I know how to protect myself from men like Richard. But you're kind and brilliant and thoughtful, and you have terrible taste in fantasy novels. Hey, those books are literary masterpieces, Edward protested. My point is, Elizabeth continued, I don't have defenses against you. Edward reached out, taking her hand gently. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. I'm not exactly an expert at relationships either, but I know I want to try. With you, Elizabeth squeezed his hand. I want that too. Good, Edward said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Because I already bought tickets to the Botanical Garden next weekend. They have a new medicinal plants exhibit. I thought you'd enjoy. Only you would consider a medicinal plants exhibit date material, Elizabeth laughed. Is that a yes? Yes. Though I expect regular dates too. Movies, mini-golf, things that don't involve Latin plant names. Deal? Edward agreed. Then, finally, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative at first, as if he was giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Elizabeth moved closer, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek. When they finally broke apart, both were slightly breathless. I've wanted to do that since the wedding, Edward admitted. When you stood up to Richard with such dignity, I thought you were magnificent. I was terrified, Elizabeth confessed. You couldn't tell. You looked like a queen, putting a peasant in his place. They kissed again, deeper this time, until Elizabeth reluctantly pulled back. "I should go," she said. "Early morning tomorrow." Edward walked her to the door, helping her with her coat. "Text me when you get home." "Always the protector," Elizabeth teased. "Always," Edward agreed seriously. As Elizabeth rode home in the Uber Edward had insisted on calling, she couldn't stop smiling. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for a perfect evening. Already planning menu for next time. Thinking risotto?" She typed back, "Only if I can help. I need to learn at least one impressive dish deal. We'll start with something simple. Maybe by date 10 we'll work up to soufflé? Date 10? Someone's confident, cautiously optimistic. Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Elizabeth replied, still smiling as Brooklyn passed by outside her window. The next few weeks fell into a wonderful routine. Edward and Elizabeth saw each other several times a week, sometimes for elaborate dates he planned with endearing thoroughness, sometimes for simple dinners or walks through the park. He came to the Rainbow Foundation's Family Fun Day and charmed everyone by remember. The next few weeks fell into a wonderful routine. Edward and Elizabeth saw each other several times a week. Sometimes for elaborate dates he planned with endearing thoroughness, sometimes for simple dinners or walks through the park. He came to the Rainbow Foundation's Family Fun Day and charmed everyone by remembering each child's name and condition. "Dr. Sterling played basketball with me," 7-year-old Marcus announced proudly, and he said my insulin pump was super cool. Elizabeth watched Edward interact with the kids, her heart doing dangerous things in her chest. He was natural with them, treating them as people rather than patients, never talking down or showing pity. "You're good with them," she told him later as they cleaned up. Edward shrugged, modest as always. "They're great kids." Marcus actually asked some sophisticated questions about continuous glucose monitoring. "I might steal him for my research team in about 15 years. The way he said it, casually assuming he'd still be in her life in 15 years, made Elizabeth's breath catch. They'd been dating for only a month, but already she couldn't imagine her life without their daily texts. His surprise lunch deliveries when she worked late, the way he listened to her rants about healthcare bureaucracy with genuine interest. Their partnership was flourishing professionally as well. The pilot program they'd designed was already showing remarkable results, with medication adherence up 60% in their target population. "We need to expand this," Edward said during one of their working dinners that had turned into a date halfway through. "I want to present it to the board next month. If they approve, we could go national by next year." Elizabeth set down her wine glass carefully. "National? Edward, that's huge. The Rainbow Foundation doesn't have that kind of infrastructure." "Then we'll build it together," he said simply. "I'll provide the funding and logistics support. You provide the community connections and implementation expertise. True partnership." The way he looked at her when he said partnership suggested he was talking about more than just business. Elizabeth felt the familiar flutter of panic and excitement. Things were moving fast. Maybe too fast. But every time she thought about slowing down, Edward would do something that made her fall a little harder. Like showing up at her office with homemade soup when she was sick, or debugging the Foundation's ancient donation system at midnight, or reading every article she sent him about childhood chronic illness, as if it were fascinating literature. A month after the wedding disaster, Elizabeth received an unexpected call. "Liz, it's Brad Ashford." She almost hung up immediately, but curiosity won. "What do you want, Brad?" "To apologize," he said, sounding exhausted. "And to warn you, Richard's lost it. He's blaming you and Sterling for everything. The wedding, his reputation, his father cutting him off. He's been drinking heavily and talking about revenge." Elizabeth felt a chill. What kind of revenge? "I don't know, but he's been asking questions about Sterling Pharmaceuticals, about your foundation. Just be careful, okay? Despite everything, you don't deserve whatever he's planning." Elizabeth immediately called Edward, who listened grimly to Brad's warning. "I'll increase security at both our offices," he said, "and I want you to have a driver for a while." "Edward, that's excessive. Please," he interrupted, "for my peace of mind. Richard Hawthorne is vindictive and currently has nothing to lose. That's a dangerous combination." Reluctantly, Elizabeth agreed. The next morning, a professional driver named James appeared at her brownstone. "Mr. Sterling's orders," he said pleasantly. "I'm to make sure you get wherever you need to go safely." The precaution proved wise. 3 days later, Richard showed up at the Rainbow Foundation, drunk and belligerent. Security prevented him from entering, but not before he screamed accusations for everyone to hear. "She destroyed my life. Her and that sanctimonious Sterling. They'll pay for this." The incident made the gossip blogs, of course. "Disgraced heir threatens non-profit director" was the kindest headline. Edward was furious when he heard, pacing his office like a caged tiger. "I should have anticipated this," he muttered. Richard's type always lashes out when cornered. Elizabeth, who'd come to his office after the incident, touched his arm gently. "This isn't your fault, or mine. Richard made his choices." Edward pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I know, but if anything happened to you because of my intervention at that wedding—" "Nothing's going to happen," Elizabeth said firmly. "Richard's all bark. He's too much of a coward for actual action." She was mostly right. Richard's revenge, when it came, was more pathetic than dangerous. He started a whisper campaign, suggesting that Edward had stolen proprietary information from Hawthorne Industries, that Elizabeth was a gold digger who'd planned the whole wedding scene. The problem was, no one believed him. Richard had burned too many bridges, while Edward's reputation was unimpeachable. The rumors died quickly, leaving Richard looking even more desperate. "It's actually sad," Elizabeth mused one evening, as she and Edward cooked together in his kitchen. They'd fallen into a routine of spending weekends at his brownstone, experimenting with increasingly ambitious recipes. Tonight was homemade ravioli, which was proving challenging. He had everything handed to him, and he threw it all away. Edward looked up from the pasta dough he was kneading. "Do you ever regret how things ended?" "I know he was important to you once." Elizabeth considered the question, flour dusting her hands as she worked. "I regret wasting 2 years trying to be someone I wasn't. I regret losing Jessica's friendship, even though she didn't deserve it. But Richard himself? No regrets. If I hadn't dated him, I might not have recognized what I have with you." Edward stopped kneading, flour-covered hands and all, to kiss her. "What do you have with me?" he asked against her lips. "Someone who sees me," Elizabeth said simply. "Actually sees me, not some idealized version or a project to be improved. Just me? You're pretty spectacular as just you," Edward murmured, deepening the kiss until the pasta dough was forgotten, and they were pressed against the counter, flour everywhere. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elizabeth laughed. "We're covered in flour, worth it," Edward said, grinning. They abandoned the ravioli for takeout, spending the rest of the evening wrapped up in each other on the couch, talking and kissing and planning their next culinary adventure. 2 months into their relationship, Edward had to travel to Geneva for a World Health Organization summit. "Come with me," he said impulsively as they discussed his trip. "The conference is only 3 days. We could spend the rest of the week exploring Switzerland." Elizabeth wanted to say yes immediately, but practicality intervened. "I can't just leave the foundation for a week. We have the autumn fundraiser coming up. Bring your laptop," Edward suggested. "Work during the conference, play tourist after. I promise to make it worth your while." Maria practically pushed Elizabeth out the door when she heard. "Go," she insisted. "I can handle the fundraiser prep." "You haven't taken a vacation in 2 years. Plus, Switzerland with your gorgeous billionaire boyfriend. That's not an opportunity you pass up." And so Elizabeth found herself on a private jet to Geneva, trying not to gawk at the luxury while Edward worked on his presentation. "I could have flown commercial," she said for the 3rd time. "I know," Edward replied patiently. "But this way we can work on the plane, and you don't lose 2 days to travel." Geneva was beautiful, all pristine lakes and mountain views. The conference was fascinating, even the parts Elizabeth attended out of support for Edward. Watching him present their joint program to global health leaders, seeing the respect he commanded, filled her with pride. "Your boyfriend's kind of amazing," whispered Dr. Sarah Kim, an old friend from Harvard who was attending the summit. "He's even better in private," Elizabeth whispered back, making Sarah laugh. "Details. I need all the details." They promised to catch up over drinks, but Elizabeth's attention was drawn back to Edward as he fielded questions with characteristic brilliance and humility. After the conference, they escaped to a small hotel in the Alps, spending their days hiking and their evenings by the fire. It was there, on a moonlit balcony overlooking snow-capped peaks, that Edward first told her he loved her. "I know it might seem fast," he said, nervous in a way that endeared him to her even more. "But I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Elizabeth. Your compassion, your strength, your terrible jokes, the way you steal all the covers, how you challenge me to be better. I love all of it. All of you." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it terrifies me sometimes. You've changed everything, Edward. How I see myself, what I believe I deserve, what I want from life. I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and how you never make me feel small. I love that you get excited about drug interactions and can spend 3 hours discussing healthcare policy without getting bored. I love you." They kissed on that balcony until the cold drove them inside, where they showed each other just how much love they felt. Returning to New York felt like a dream ending, but Edward surprised her by suggesting they look for a place together. "I know we've only been together a few months," he said, as they unpacked in his Brooklyn brownstone. "But I already hate sleeping without you. Plus, your apartment is too small, and mine doesn't have enough closet space for both of us." Elizabeth laughed. "Are you asking me to move in with you for closet space?" "Among other reasons," Edward said, pulling her close. "Say yes. We can find something perfect for both of us. Home office for you proper, lab space for me. Kitchen big enough for our cooking experiments." After much discussion and a few tears, they began house hunting. It became a weekend adventure, touring brownstones and condos, imagining their life in each space. They finally found it in Park Slope, a renovated brownstone with original details, modern kitchen, and a garden perfect for summer dinners. "It's expensive," Elizabeth said, even though she knew Edward could buy the entire block without blinking. "It's perfect," Edward countered. "And it's going to be ours. Both our names on the deed. True partnership, remember?" The move happened gradually, blending their lives in ways both small and significant. Elizabeth's books mixed with Edward's medical journals. Her colourful artwork brightened his minimalist aesthetic. His state-of-the-art coffee machine sat next to her collection of mismatched mugs. They hosted their first dinner party for the Foundation staff and Edward's research team, the two groups mixing surprisingly well. "You two are disgustingly happy," Maria observed, helping with dishes. "It's inspiring and nauseating in equal measure," Elizabeth laughed, watching Edward explain some complex medical concept to her development director with patient enthusiasm. "We really are happy," she agreed, still somewhat amazed by the fact. 6 months after the wedding disaster, Jessica reached out. Her email was brief. "I know you hate me, but I need help. Please." Against Edward's advice, Elizabeth agreed to meet her. Jessica looked exhausted, her designer clothes replaced with practical maternity wear, her perfect makeup absent. "Thank you for coming," she said, hands resting on her very pregnant belly. "I didn't know who else to call." The story came out in pieces. Richard's family had cut him off. Brad had disappeared. And Jessica's own family was barely speaking to her. She was living off savings that were rapidly depleting, facing single motherhood with no support system. "Why should I help you?" Elizabeth asked, not unkindly but needing to understand. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't. I was horrible to you. I justified it by saying Richard and I were meant to be, but the truth is I was jealous. You had this authenticity I could never manage. Richard saw it too. It's why he tried so hard to diminish you. We were both threatened by someone who didn't need external validation." The admission was so raw, so honest, that Elizabeth felt her anger beginning to thaw. "What do you need?" Elizabeth asked finally. Jessica looked surprised by the question. I need a job. My trust fund is frozen until the baby is born and paternity is established. I have a marketing degree I've never used. I just need someone to give me a chance." Elizabeth thought for a moment. "The foundation needs a events coordinator. The pay isn't what you're used to, but it's honest work. You'd be reporting to Maria, and I won't show you any favoritism. Can you handle that?" Jessica nodded eagerly. "Yes. God, yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. I won't let you down." Edward was less thrilled with Elizabeth's decision. "She betrayed you," he pointed out over dinner. "She's pregnant and desperate," Elizabeth countered, "and people deserve second chances." "You taught me that," Edward sighed. "Using my own philosophy against me is unfair." But he supported her decision, even offering to cover Jessica's prenatal care through a special Sterling Pharmaceuticals program for employees. Jessica started the next week, throwing herself into the work with surprising dedication. Maria, initially skeptical, reported that she was actually quite good at event planning. The autumn fundraiser was a massive success, raising more money than any previous year. Jessica's marketing skills and connections, combined with the Foundation's mission, proved powerful. Even more surprising was how well she integrated with the team. "She's different," Maria told Elizabeth. "Humbler. She actually asked me to teach her Excel yesterday. The old Jessica would have died before admitting she didn't know something." Elizabeth watched Jessica work, seeing glimpses of the friend she'd once known before money and status corrupted everything. A month before Jessica's due date, Brad returned. He showed up at the Foundation, sober and apologetic, wanting to take responsibility for his child. The reunion with Jessica was tearful and complicated. "I'm in therapy," Brad told Elizabeth when Jessica stepped out. "Trying to figure out why I betrayed my best friend, why I ran when things got hard. I want to be better. For the baby, if nothing else. Elizabeth found herself in the strange position of counseling the man who'd helped destroy her relationship. But seeing him genuinely trying to change softened her heart. Edward was hosting a Sterling Pharmaceuticals holiday party when Elizabeth suggested something radical. "Invite Jessica and Brad," she said. "Show the world that people can move forward, can forgive." Edward looked at her with wonder. "Your capacity for forgiveness amazes me," but he did it, and the party became an exercise in grace. Richard's absence was notable. He'd moved to California, supposedly to start over, but really to escape the whispers. Jessica and Brad attended, grateful and subdued, while Elizabeth and Edward played hosts to a mixing of their worlds that would have been impossible a year ago. On New Year's Eve, as they watched fireworks from their brownstone's roof deck, Edward pulled Elizabeth close. "This year has been extraordinary," he said. "I went to a wedding expecting tedium and found you. Found love, found purpose beyond my lab, found a life I didn't know I wanted." Elizabeth kissed him, tasting champagne and possibility. "You saved me from more than just Richard's cruelty that night," she told him. "You saved me from the smaller life I'd accepted. You showed me I deserved more." "We showed each other," Edward corrected. "True partnership, remember?" As the clock struck midnight, Edward dropped to one knee. Elizabeth's heart stopped as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Elizabeth Chen," he said, voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you've transformed my life in ways I'm still discovering. You've made me better, not perfect, but better. You've shown me that success means nothing without someone to share it with, that brilliance without compassion is just clever emptiness. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in everything, forever?" The ring was perfect, not ostentatious like Richard would have chosen, but elegant and unique, with a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "It reminded me of your eyes," Edward explained nervously, when Elizabeth didn't immediately respond. "But if you prefer something else—" "Yes," Elizabeth interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to the ring, yes to you, yes to everything." "Of course I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood to kiss her as fireworks exploded overhead and their friends cheered from inside. The engagement news spread quickly. The pharmaceutical world was thrilled. Edward Sterling, their brilliant but reclusive star, was marrying someone who understood and shared his vision. The non-profit sector celebrated one of their own landing, not just a billionaire, but a true partner in change. Even the gossip blogs were surprisingly positive, running headlines like "From Wedding Disaster to Dream Romance," and how Elizabeth Chen turned heartbreak into happiness. They planned a spring wedding, small but elegant. Elizabeth insisted on no drama, no social climbing guests, no one who didn't genuinely celebrate their love. Edward readily agreed, happy to let her plan their perfect day. He was more interested in planning their future, the expansion of their program, the children they both wanted, the life they'd build together. "I want our kids to understand both sides," he said one evening. "The importance of innovation and the necessity of access. They'll grow up knowing privilege comes with responsibility." Jessica's baby arrived 2 weeks early, a healthy girl she named Hope. Elizabeth and Edward were among the first visitors, bringing practical gifts and genuine congratulations. "Thank you," Jessica said, cradling her daughter. "For the job, the second chance. for showing me what real friendship looks like. I'm sorry I forgot for so long." Watching her former friend with her new baby, Elizabeth felt the last of her resentment fade. People could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves. She was living proof, and so was Edward. Richard sent a letter a month before the wedding. Elizabeth almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. His handwriting was shaky, the words carefully chosen. "Elizabeth, I heard about your engagement. I wanted to offer my congratulations and my apologies. I've been in therapy, working to understand why I needed to diminish others to feel important. You deserve better than I could give. Sterling is lucky to have you. I hope you'll be happy in all the ways I prevented you from being. Richard." "It's growth," Edward said when she showed him the letter. "Not enough to erase the pain he caused, but growth nonetheless." Elizabeth agreed, filing the letter away and choosing to focus on the future rather than the past. She had a wedding to plan, a program to expand, a life to build with a man who saw her truly. Richard's apology was appreciated, but unnecessary. She'd already forgiven him by becoming someone he could never have imagined her to be. The wedding day dawned perfect and clear. Elizabeth wore her mother's dress, altered to fit and updated with touches of her own style. Edward waited at the altar in the botanical garden they'd visited on one of their first real dates, surrounded by medicinal plants and friends who become family. As she walked down the aisle, Elizabeth thought about the journey that had brought them here, from humiliation to love, from heartbreak to wholeness. "You look radiant," Edward whispered when she reached him. "So do you," Elizabeth replied, and he did, joy transforming his usually serious face into something transcendent. They'd written their own vows, of course. Edward promised to always see her truly, to support her dreams as fiercely as his own, to make her laugh when life got too serious. Elizabeth vowed to challenge him, to remind him that life existed outside the lab, to love him through every success and failure. When they kissed, sealing their partnership, the assembled crowd erupted in genuine celebration. The reception was in the garden's conservatory, all twinkling lights and laughter. Jessica caught the bouquet, blushing when Brad smiled at her from across the room. Maria gave a speech that had everyone in tears, talking about watching Elizabeth bloom from heartbreak into happiness. Edward's research team presented them with a molecular model of oxytocin, the love hormone, made from sugar, which Edward found delightfully nerdy and perfect. Even the wedding cake was them. 3 tiers decorated with sugar sculptures of both medicinal plants and the children's artwork from the foundation. "No drama," Elizabeth said with satisfaction, as they took a moment alone on the conservatory balcony. "No surprise pregnancies, no bitter exes, no family feuds, just love." Edward spun her in her dress, making her laugh. "Just love," he agreed, "though I wouldn't change how we met. Every moment led us here. Even Richard's cruelty," Elizabeth asked. "Especially that," Edward said firmly. "It brought you to that wedding, gave me the excuse to approach you, started everything. I'd endure 1,000 cruel exes to find you again." They honeymooned in Japan, exploring temples and technology in equal measure. Edward had learned enough Japanese to navigate, while Elizabeth threw herself into the culture with characteristic enthusiasm. They stayed in traditional ryokans and modern hotels, hiked Mount Fuji and explored Tokyo's innovation districts. "I love you," became their constant refrain, said over sunrise views and midnight ramen, in ancient shrines and bustling markets. They returned home exhausted but energized, ready to build their life together. The program they'd created expanded rapidly, reaching 5 states within a year. Other pharmaceutical companies began adopting similar models, with Edward generously sharing their framework. Competition in doing good isn't really competition, he explained to skeptics. Rising tides lift all boats. Elizabeth's foundation grew too, able to serve 3 times as many families with the increased funding and support. Jessica, now events director, proved instrumental in building corporate partnerships. She and Brad were cautiously dating again, rebuilding trust slowly while co-parenting beautifully. 2 years after their wedding, Elizabeth found out she was pregnant. She told Edward by leaving the test in his lab coat pocket with a note, "Our best collaboration yet." His joy was infectious, and he immediately began researching everything about pregnancy and child development with typical Edward thoroughness. "Did you know that babies can recognize their parents' voices in utero?" he'd announce randomly. "We should start reading to them now." Elizabeth indulged his enthusiasm, secretly charmed by his transformation into an expectant father. They had twins, a boy and a girl they named Gabriel and Sophia. Born healthy, despite arriving 6 weeks early, they were perfect mixtures of their parents. Gabriel had Edward's grey eyes and Elizabeth's smile. Sophia had Elizabeth's dark hair and Edward's intense focus, even as a newborn. "They're going to change the world," Edward whispered the first night home, both babies sleeping in his arms. "They already have," Elizabeth replied, watching her husband hold their children with infinite tenderness. The balance of parenthood and work proved challenging but manageable with support. They hired help but remained hands-on parents, adjusting schedules to ensure one of them was always home for bedtime. The foundation created an on-site nursery, inspired by their need and serving all employees. Sterling Pharmaceuticals followed suit, with Edward pushing through family-friendly policies that became industry standards. "Happy employees are productive employees," he'd say, bouncing Sophia during board meetings conducted via video. Richard reached out once more when the twins were 6 months old. He'd started a small non-profit in California, helping young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. "Your work inspired me," his email read. "I wanted you to know that something good came from my worst moments." Elizabeth shared it with Edward, who simply said, "Good for him." They donated to Richard's non-profit anonymously, choosing grace over grudge. The past was past. Their future was sleeping in the nursery down the hall. 5 years after that fateful wedding, Elizabeth and Edward renewed their vows in their garden. The twins toddle-walked down the aisle as flower children, more interested in eating petals than scattering them. Jessica and Brad were there with their daughter Hope and new son William. Maria had married her girlfriend and adopted a teenager from the Foundation's program. The original wedding party that had brought them together was completely transformed, proof that people could change, could grow, could choose love over bitterness. "You saved me," Elizabeth told Edward as they danced at their renewal reception. "From a life of settling, of accepting less than I deserved." Edward shook his head. "We saved each other. I was successful but empty. You filled all the spaces I didn't know were hollow." They kissed as their children played at their feet, surrounded by chosen family and the life they'd built from the ashes of other people's cruelty. The billionaire who'd whispered "be my date" had become her husband, father of her children, partner in changing the world. The secret he'd revealed about the bride had led to something neither expected: true love, lasting love, love that transformed everything it touched. And that was the only secret that really mattered. That's it for today, family. Tell me, what lesson did you learn from this story? I'd like to know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your post notification as we share stories like this every week. Until next time, stay blessed.